This is Chris, and this is going to be another Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire video, and today we're going to talk about prophecy. My major question is prophecy a real thing? I mean, obviously we have things that are told to people that come true. We have woods witches, we have shadow binders, but I want to get into prophecy because I think it's very, very interesting in our story. Is it something that people can change if they're aware of, or is it something that's predetermined to happen no matter what choice they make? Kind of like my Panthers winning the Super Bowl this year. So obviously prophecy and prophetic dreams are kind of a real thing in our story because we see so many people that are prophetic in a way, tell people these things is going to happen and they do come to pass. But the question is, does the person have free will to change that if they know about the prophecy? So the people in our story that receive these prophecies really control this information, and they go about it in different ways in our story. So like Melisandre, for example, she has these visions she sees in her flames, but she tells people what she thinks they mean, how she personally interprets those things. So she takes that information and puts her own spin on it and tells you what it means, as opposed to a character like Moqorro, where he just sees these things in his flames and tells you what they are and lets kind of you decide what the hell that means. He doesn't put his own spin on it, or at least he doesn't seem to. So with the Melisandre example, obviously the big one is the Azor Ahai prophecy. She tells Stannis that he is Azor Ahai reborn, and as far as she's concerned, there's no other options about it. She don't say that this is what I think I saw, she says this is what I saw based on her own religion and beliefs, but this is the way she does shit. She sees these things in her flames, and instead of kind of laying it out on the table, letting Stannis kind of decide what that means to him, as opposed to the Moqorro character who lays these things out again and says, all right, here's what it is, believe what you will. The example I would give with Moqorro is that when he's on the boat with Tyrion, he's also on his way to go see Dany in Meereen. He has a quote when talking to Tyrion that says, "Dragons old and young, true and false, bright and dark, and you, a small man with a big shadow snarling in the midst of it all." So Moqorro's telling Tyrion here, all right, here's what I've seen, but he's not putting his own spin on it and telling Tyrion what it means. Now, of course, we as the reader can kind of speculate on what that means because of other things we've read in the story. So I think in this case, the old dragon refers to somebody like either Bloodraven, who's an old Targaryen, or possibly Maester Aemon, who was Aemon Targaryen before he went to the Wall. I think the young and bright dragon probably refers to Dany. I think the young and dark dragon probably refers to Jon, being that he wears black in the Night's Watch. I think the false dragon probably refers to Aegon, or Fagon, if you don't believe that he's a Targaryen and believe he's a Blackfire pretender like I tend to believe. But then he says, "and you." So there's no mention of a lioness, little prophetic thing he tells Tyrion. He says, "and you're standing here in the midst of it all, snarling." So is this possibly pointing to Tyrion being a dragon or a Targaryen as opposed to an actual Lannister? This is obviously a very popular fan theory that I would love to see come true. Maybe it ties into the third head of the dragon type thing, that Tyrion is actually a Targaryen along with Jon, and then Jon, Dany, and Tyrion save the world and ride off into the sunset, rule the kingdom, and it's all unicorns and rainbows after that. But then we come to other types of characters that give off these prophetic visions in our story that give them more encryptic riddles. And of course, two big examples of that would be Mirri Maz Duur and Quaithe. Mirri Maz Duur, of course, is the one Dany burned in the funeral pyre during Drogo's funeral, where she hatched her dragons. Now, of course, her most popular prophetic riddle, so to speak, is when Dany's asking her when she'll see Drogo again, and she says, "When the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, when the seas go dry and mountains blow in the wind like leaves, when your womb quickens again and you bear a living child, then he will return and not before." Now, of course, when I first read this, I thought the same thing that probably most other people thought, was just a nice way of saying when hell freezes over, because that shit will never happen. But as you start thinking about it and get deeper into the book, specifically A Dance with Dragons, and then of course you do a little research on it to kind of confirm your suspicions, I think this could very well be something that's already started to happen. So for example, when she says the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, I think this could refer to Quentyn Martell, who came from Dorne in the west and came to the east to find Dany and marry her, because there was a previous pact where her brother Viserys was supposed to marry a Dornish princess to get Targaryens back on the throne, since they've been Targaryen supporters this entire time. But of course, Dorne Martell's plan after Viserys is killed is the next best thing, and that's to marry one of his sons to Dany. So he sends Quentyn over to find Dany and marry her, but it's too late. She's already married fucking his daughter, and Quentyn ends up dying. So he kind of set in the east. And she says when the seas go dry. Now I think this is pretty simple. I think this means the Dothraki Sea, because it actually experiences some type of drought when Dany's out there roaming around with Drogon. And she also says when the mountains blow like leaves in the wind. I think this refers to when Rhaegal and Viserion get loose, they start tearing shit up, and they actually destroy some pyramids in Meereen that kind of remind you of mountains. And she says when her wound quickens. Well, it so happens that once she gets out to the Dothraki Sea after flying around on Drogon a while after escaping Daznak's pit, that she starts bleeding, and it seems to be a menstrual type cycle, as it's described as blood's running down her thighs, which seems to imply that's not happened in a long time. And then of course I think the rest of it's probably stuff that probably hasn't happened yet, because it says when you bear a living child. And that brings us to Quaithe, who I mentioned before, who's another person in our story who gives these prophetic dreams in riddles instead of telling somebody straight up what the hell they're supposed to do. Again, this is in opposition to a Melisandre type character who says, hey, this is what I saw and this is what you should do about it, motherfucker. But she gives off these cryptic riddles. Is it just for the sake of us trying to figure shit out as readers? Because actually Dany starts to figure some of this out on her own. But the interesting thing about Quaithe is she described as a Shadowbinder, but we never hear anything about her actual religion if she has one at all. We never hear about R'hllor the Red God. We never hear about any other religious figure or deity that she may worship herself. Is she just a Shadowbinder or sorceress that has no deity at all? And where does she get the information from in the first place if we don't believe that power comes from gods in our story? Now, of course, the identity of Quaithe is a big thing in our story. Everybody wants to know who the hell she is, and I think the Shiera Seastar theory is very interesting. I'm not completely sold on it yet, but I believe it would be very interesting, and it kind of fits the duality of our story when you have Bloodraven over there kind of watching over the ice side as far as Jon and Bran and things like that, because he's over 100 years old and obviously part of the Old God Network, and Shiera Seastar was Bloodraven's half-sister / lover back in the day, who was described as practicing the dark arts. So that would kind of fit for her to be Quaithe, who went over to take care of Dany and the fire side of the world. But I've never figured out why she'd just stick around in Karth doing tattoos instead of following Dany around and looking after her in the first place. Or has she? And of course, one of Quaithe's most popular riddles goes like this. No, hear me, Daenerys Targaryen, the glass candles are burning. Soon comes the pale mare, and after her the others, Kraken and Dark Flame, Lion and Griffin, the Sun's Son and the Mummer's Dragon. Trust none of them. Remember the Undying. Beware the perfume sensual. These seem pretty straightforward. At least we're led to believe they're pretty straightforward, because Dany actually starts figuring these out on her own. So why is good old George giving us riddles for us to figure out when the actual character herself figures most of these out? She says the glass candles are burning. Well, that's pretty much just telling us that she's using glass candles to communicate with Dany. They're basically candles made out of dragon glass that have no wick or no wax, as I said in the magic video, but they can be lit by magical means, and they give you the ability to communicate with people over a long distance, and they give you the ability to enter people with dreams and send them visions. So it seems to be saying that basically that's what she's using. She could be pointing to the fact that back at the Citadel, the glass candles are actually burning again, referring to Marwyn the Mage, who's actually on his way himself to see Dany and Meereen. Then she says, soon comes the pale mare and then the others. I think the pale mare is pretty straightforward. Most everybody believes that it's the bloody flux. It's a horrible condition that spreads around the city of Meereen as the Yunkai try to take over and kill Dany and kind of gets into the city as well. I don't want to describe it here, but imagine eating 2-week-old Taco Bell and it kills you shortly thereafter. Need a lot of water. Then she refers to the Kraken. This seems pretty straightforward. Most people believe this is Victarion Greyjoy, who was sent over by his brother Euron the Crow's Eye to find Dany and bring her dragons back. But Victarion, of course, has plans to keep the dragons for himself and wed Dany himself to overthrow Euron, who has been chosen to be the new king of the Ironborn during the King's Moot. She then says Dark Flame. Now this could possibly refer to Aegon the supposed Targaryen, who most people believe is a Blackfire pretender, hence Dark Flame, Black Fire. Kind of makes sense, but I think Aegon's referred to in the latter part of this little riddle. I think this refers to the Makaro character I mentioned earlier, who is known to the Ironborn as the Black Flame. He is a Red Priest of R'hllor, and he is also on his way to see Dany. There's a lot of damn people on their way to see Dany. Then next she mentions the lion. I think that's pretty straightforward, and it's referring to Tyrion. Then she says the griffin, and of course that's probably Jon Connington, whose house sigil is the griffin, so these are pretty straightforward. After that she mentions the sun's son. Again, this referring to Quentyn Martell, the sun being obviously the sigil of House Martell. And then she mentions the Mummer's Dragon, which this is the one I think points to Aegon or Fagon Targaryen, who is probably a Blackfire, not a real Targaryen. Varys used to be a Mummer before he was the Master of Whispers in the old days, and that's who he supports for the Iron Throne in the books. So basically she says don't trust any of these people, and then she says beware the perfume sensual. Now the perfume sensual could mean a number of people. It could be Hizdahr, it could be Illyrio, it could be Varys, it could be Reznak. There's so many people that kind of fit this description, so I won't get to that here. There's just too many stinking ass perfume servants over in the east, I suppose. But the point being here that she's telling Dany not to trust any of these people, but she needs some of these people if she's to obtain her goal of regaining the Iron Throne, especially somebody like Tyrion, as we've seen in the show. So she's saying not to trust these people because she's protecting Dany, or should she not trust Quaithe? And lastly, we have these people like Jojen, who has green dreams, and he basically thinks that green dreams, at least in his point of view, are true no matter what, because he actually tells Bran this. For example, he told Bran that he had a dream of the winged wolf being chained. That's why he went to Winterfell in the first place, to let him go. He also saw in a dream the ocean rising over the walls of Winterfell and people drowning, which was referring to the Greyjoys and Theon specifically coming back to take Winterfell. And as far as the Bran piece, he says, I dreamed of a winged wolf bound to earth with gray stone chains. It was a green dream, so I knew it was true. A crow was trying to peck through the chains, being the three-eyed crow, but the stone was too hard and his beak could only chip at them. So again, he tells Bran this straight up. Obviously, Bran was the winged wolf. At the time, he was kind of scared to open his third eye, being the three-eyed crow, being recruited by Bloodraven. So he went to rescue him and Mira, and his goal was to get Bran to Bloodraven. The point being here that he thinks it's absolutely true. My question would be, is it absolutely true? If Bran chose not to go with Jojen, would he have still ended up with Bloodraven somehow, whether he wanted to go or not? Was it his destiny, or did he have a choice in the matter? So, do any of our characters have choices in the matter of prophecy? Is it something they can change if they're aware of it? And what about people who are involved in prophecies that don't know anything about it? So could Bran have chosen not to leave Winterfell? Maybe he just dies there and that's the end of that storyline. Could Dany have ignored Quaithe and said, fuck off, I don't know what the hell you mean with all your riddles, and trust everybody that came up to her? Maybe she kills his daughter and marries Quentin Martell. So what if she does? What does that mean to us? I mean, does she end up in the same place? That she's going to end up in a Dream of Spring, and once that ends anyway? But of course, that's the cool thing about prophecy in our story in the first place. George R. R. Martin has made us the magi, or the sorcerers of the story, because we get to determine what these things mean to us by putting things together and having the benefit of knowing what's going on in other chapters from other people's point of view. And we get to theory craft and determine what we think they are until we are told otherwise, or something is revealed to be the truth of the matter as far as the prophecy goes. And as I said in my last magic video, I don't believe there are actually any gods in this story, and George R. R. Martin himself has said that we won't see any gods show up and start walking on water. So what's cool about our story in A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones is no matter what we think about prophecy, whether it's predetermined or things can be changed from the characters' point of views, is that George R. R. Martin himself is the god of our story because the end game is already written. So anyway, that's all I had this week, you guys, for prophecy in our story. I just want to throw that out there and get your opinions on it because I think it's very, very cool to think about and discuss. Is it something that you find out about and then you fulfill, or you fulfill it, then you find out about it? So it's very, very interesting to me. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Is prophecy a predetermined thing going to happen anyway, or these characters have a choice in it? So from this point on until season 6 comes out, I have pretty much all Game of Thrones stuff coming up since Star Wars has kind of died down now. I may have one here or there, but I've got a lot more Game of Thrones stuff planned, including some stuff with Val from Because Geek. Also, speaking of Val, be sure to check out our new channel, Because Views, which is our kind of behind-the-scenes YouTube journey channel that we started together. I'll put the link in the description below. In the meantime, you can click here to check out my last video I did on magic in the world of Westeros, and why I think magic is probably just a natural cyclical thing in our story, and why is it coming back in our story right now, why did it disappear in the first place. And you can also click here for the last video I did, which was the Game of Thrones Q&A, where I answer some of your questions. I also talk about George R. R. Martin's post about the Winds of Winter not being released on time. So check those out, let me know what you think. Thanks for all the support, you guys, I really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to get everything. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. I don't want to describe it here, but imagine eating 2-week-old Taco Bell and it kills you shortly thereafter.